On behalf of Lieutenant General A.K. Singh, Ati Vishis Seva Medal, Yuddha Seva Medal, Sena Medal, Vishis Seva Medal, I extend a very warm welcome to Professor Ajay Shah, who is here amongst us today to talk on lessons of Ukraine war. Professor Ajay Shah has studied at IIT Mumbai and USC Los Angeles. He has held positions at Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, Indira Gandhi Institute for Development Research, Department of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Finance and National Institute for Public Finance and Policy. He is now part of Cross-Disciplinary Knowledge Data Research, a non-profit research organization located in Mumbai, and also the Jindal Global University. His research interests include policy issues on Indian economic growth, open economy macroeconomics, public finance, financial economics, and pensions. His research is at the intersection of economics, law, and public administration. His second book, co-authored with Mr. Vijay Kelkar, In Service of the Republic, The Art and Science of Economic Policy, featured in Bloomberg's Global 2020 Best Books on Business and Leadership. May I now request Professor Ajay Shah to address the gathering, please.
I'm very grateful. This is very loud. I'm very grateful and honored to be with all of you today. I have one humble request. Can you please interrupt me all the time? Okay? So don't let me go on. It's boring as hell. Like you, I have sat in too many talks which are not fun. So this is more interesting as a conversation, as a debate, as a disagreement. So please interrupt me all the time. Okay? So I'm here to talk about some lessons of the Ukraine war. All of us have seen some of these photographs, some of these videos. Something big and remarkable is going on. I'm going to shortly argue that this is the first high-intensity war after the Second World War. So there's something big and new and important that is happening here. Okay? So I'd like to just get going with reviewing some of the basic facts and history. Then we'll get to the interesting material. So what I have is a bunch of maps. Okay? So for all of us, the foundation of understanding these things is maps and dates. So we start on the day of the beginning of the war. As of that date, the Russians had occupied Crimea in 2014, and immediately after that, the so-called Donetsk People's Republic (DPR) and the Luhansk People's Republic (LPR) militias with Russian backing and Russian troops fighting under DPR LPR uniform had captured this land, and of course the Russians had Crimea. Just for the dates, the Crimean capture was 2014, and in 2018 the Kerch Bridge was built here, which connected Crimea to the mainland. So otherwise, from a logistics point of view, it was horrible to try to supply Crimea without having the southern territory of Ukraine in Russian hands. So immediately after the conquest of Crimea in 2014, they put in supreme effort to build this bridge, and that's called the Kerch Bridge that came up in 2018. So in 2018, they got a big road and a railway track, and then they basically have unlimited ability to move supplies into Crimea. The Black Sea Fleet sits at Sevastopol, and the USSR and Russia used to be the dominant naval player in the Black Sea. If I take you back to the history, in 1991, after the referendum, when Ukraine became a free country, they signed a long lease with the Russian Navy, so that the Russian Navy continued to be in Sevastopol, and the Black Sea Fleet was hosted out of Sevastopol. So that was the situation one day before the invasion, which was 24th of February. Okay. Then we get to the early the early steps of the invasion. There was an attack from the north towards Kiev. There was an attack. So this is from Belarus. So technically, Belarus claims that they are a separate country, but they allowed Russia to operate military forces through Belarus. So this attack came from within Belarus, and there was another attack that came in from Russia, and land was taken all along in the Kharkiv region, and there was an expansion here beyond the old land that was held in Donbass. The entire south collapsed and it was taken over. So this was the first few days after the invasion began. All of us know the stories. The attack on Kiev didn't work out, and the Ukrainians put on a stout defense, and Russia chose to give up and withdraw from all these territories, while the rest of the thing was going well. Okay, so then you get to stage 2. I'm putting up the date as 7th April. So we finished with the drama of February and March. On 7th of April, all this blue is territory that had been reclaimed by Ukraine, and the Russian forces all swung to the eastern side and made gains here and consolidated all this. Okay, so this is the situation as of April. Then we get to the next step where the sequence of events was actually very interesting. I'm going to describe, there was a very interesting operation designed around the Kherson province. It turned out that there are only 3 bridges that were able to connect the Russian forces across the Dnipro River. And the Ukrainians blew all these bridges, or they made it clear that these bridges would be under attack. The Russians reinforced this region heavily, and then the Ukrainians launched a lightning offensive here and grabbed all this. And this is one of the remarkable pieces of mobility. It is Western style mobility where in essentially 6 days this entire thing was done. So it is light, fast movement rather than a more stolid style of war. So this is the first place where Ukraine showed a capability in a Western way of war, which is something people had not expected. And also it was a very, very clever idea that they loudly made it clear that we're going after the logistics of this place. You guys will not be able to defend it, and the Russians doubled down and increased their forces and started establishing bigger and bigger supplies in Kherson. And in fact, the Ukrainians launched a lightning offensive up there. Okay, and that worked like a charm. And as I say, this entire thing was done in 6 days. That is quite a remarkable piece. That is 12th of September. And then after that, the logistics choke on Kherson actually worked out. And the new Russian general Surovikin decided that this was untenable, that without connectivity you can't fight a modern war. The Ukrainians kept up the force enough to be consuming stores, not doing a significant invasion because that would burn lives. And Surovikin, in my opinion, correctly understood that this thing is not tenable, and the Russians did a high quality fighting retreat. This is in contrast in Kharkiv here. The speed of the advance was so great that the Russians were caught by surprise. So they left behind vast amounts of stores. They left behind ammunition, they left behind equipment. It is an interesting comment that if you count all the sources of military aid for Ukraine, the biggest source of military aid for Ukraine is Russia because of this captured equipment. That in 6 days, the collapse of the Russian lines here was so dramatic that they left all the equipment just there. So the Ukrainians were able to grab all that equipment. In contrast, the retreat from here was extremely well managed. There was only one bridge out, and you would have thought that, in the modern transparent battlefield, the Ukrainian side would have been able to see everything happening on that bridge and be able to precisely attack that bridge. However, nothing much happened, and the Russians got a great withdrawal done, and they managed to fool the other side that they were actually not withdrawing, so the Ukrainians didn't know what was happening, and they got a great withdrawal done. They got all their heavy equipment out, they got all their ammunition stores out, they destroyed whatever was left behind. So it was not a repeat of the Kharkiv offensive in terms of leaving a lot of equipment behind. So that takes you to the 11th of November. Okay, so this was recaptured and this was recaptured, and I'm not bothering with all the northern stuff. And that's where essentially we are today. Compared to that, now there are some small changes, they are not significant. This is where we are today, and the interesting things here are these little dots here and this little land drawings here inside. This is all partisan activity. So Ukrainian partisans and Ukrainian special forces are quite active all over this area. Okay, they're gathering intelligence, they're blowing up ammunition, they're killing generals. So there's each of these dots is where there's been a significant partisan or special forces operation, and one never knows quite what is being done by whom. Okay, so this is my brief review of the facts. Is all this interesting? Do you have any thoughts and comments at this point? So I'm sure all of us broadly know these things, but I just wanted to reiterate the maps and the dates. And this is where we are, and there is some attempt at launching a new counter-offensive. We'll see how it goes, because that is for the future. So with this background, now I want to come to my main subject. This is my last fact. This is a graph of the amount of Ukrainian territory that was captured by Russia. So we start at the 2014 invasion of Crimea and in the Donbass, where they got some 16,000 square kilometers. Then at the peak of the invasion, they were at some 60,000 square kilometers. They retreated from the north, but they were continuing to make progress on the south. And then you get the Kharkiv and the Kherson offensives, and today 40,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory is now controlled by Russia. This is where we stand today. This is old, November 2022. The changes compared to that are 200 square kilometers, so it's not much. Okay, so this is basically the picture. Okay, so now we start our main story for today, and I have a curious question for all of you here. Does somebody know, does some logistics genius know, in the entire Pakistan, India-Bangladesh war of 1971, how many shells were used? Because it's a lovely fact. I would love to know, but I don't know. So does somebody remember? I mean, are there documents about the entire logistics that was organized, and did we worry about shell consumption per day, and do we have enough shells to sustain the speed of this offensive? It is going much faster than we thought. Are we able to carry enough equipment inside? Okay, so I mean, it's a fact that we should know. Here's a fact we know from this war. How many shells per day are being used in Ukraine? And the answer is 10,000. Today, the Ukrainians are using about 10,000 shells a day. The Russians probably 15,000, 20,000. Okay? We don't have exact data. We have better data on the Ukrainian side. Okay? So this is the biggest high-intensity war since World War II. We've never seen these kinds of numbers anywhere. Similarly, is everybody familiar with something called the Oryx blog? Have you heard the name, the Oryx blog? Okay, so this is something remarkable and new. It's in the world of open source intelligence. We would have never imagined these things happening. 2 years ago, nobody would have imagined. So here's the story. Okay? There's a war, and various amazing things are happening. A plane crashes, a tank gets blown up. Okay? And some bloke picks up their cell phone and takes a photograph or shoots a video. Okay, and all these things show up on social media. And that bloke could be a local civilian, it could be a soldier. Okay, so all the soldiers have phones. You can't prevent soldiers from having phones. It would have a very big adverse effect on morale. And these things find their way out on some Telegram channel, on social media. You can't quite tell where. So the Oryx blog is a bunch of volunteers who capture every single photograph and video that has come out of equipment being destroyed. And then they do standard checks to make sure that it's not some photoshopped. So they want that sense of authenticity, that this is a real image taken by a real person and it's not information warfare. Okay? Then it can be that the same tank is photographed from 5 angles. Okay? So then they sit and study all the photographs in their midst. And sometimes these things come out with a long lag. It can be 6 months after an event, the video comes out because somebody's phone had the video and the person did not put it out for a long time. So is it an event we had already seen earlier, or is it a new event? Phones carry GPS traces and they carry highly precise date timestamps. So again, as long as it's not information warfare and if it's not been artificially manipulated, it's actually quite possible to think that I have these 17 pictures across different people of the same tank at the same lat long at the same time. Okay? So they keep an inventory. They keep track of every single piece of equipment which has been destroyed, where there is what they call public domain visual imagery. So it's not a claim. Not somebody is saying that I shot down a plane. It is that the plane crashed and there is footage, either a video or an image of that plane crash, and then of course they identify the plane. Okay, so then they're able to count that each variant of the T-72, each variant of the T-80 that is used by either side, how many have been destroyed. They keep a score of how many confirmed kills there are. Now, of course, there are more kills than that we don't know, that nobody knows. But this is the core that we know, that there is no doubt that this much equipment has been lost by each side. And that brings me back to the biggest high-intensity war since World War II, because on both sides we're talking thousands of tanks. So never since World War II. So for example, let's look at 1973, the Yom Kippur War. On the side facing Egypt in the Sinai Desert, the Israelis had 300 tanks and 200 tanks out of them got destroyed. And we consider that a ridiculous rate of intensity of warfare. In this war, we have confirmed visual kills of over 2,000 Russian tanks getting killed. It's at a different level altogether. So there has never been a high intensity war of this nature since World War II. Okay? That's my claim. And therefore, I say to all of us that we should study it. That this is modern war. All of us are so deeply grounded in World War II, in 1971. We know individual names of battles, individual tank commanders, and so on. But the world has changed, and techniques, tactics, procedures, equipment, military possibilities, so many things keep on changing. And this to me is a lab where we can learn. So that is why ever since this war started, I have just gone crazy. I seem to spend half my day only studying this war. So I am an amateur. In some ways, I don't know this. All of you are more qualified than me. You know these things better than me. I just want to say that I have tried it. Okay, and our dear friend felt that I have some skills in this subject. So I pretty much read everything that has come out in the public domain. I've read all the papers that have been written on this. I've tried to keep my head above the information warfare. I recognize that both sides are lying, both sides are trying to manage propaganda. It's a part of life. I mean, the information space is one of the battlegrounds. So I've tried to the best of my ability to try to decipher a picture, and I'm here to tell you what I think I have learned. I'm always constantly locating it as, how did I get surprised? Okay, so some of these things maybe all of you already knew quite well. I'm just saying to you, over the duration of this war, where did I get surprised? I'm a person that is deeply knowledgeable about World War II, and I've generally tried to keep aware of all the developments that have taken place on the ideas of war in the period after World War II, and I got surprised by numerous things. My talk is my list of surprises. Okay, so I'm going to show you all the things which happened which caught me by surprise. So let's get started. I have 10 things to say to you. Okay, so the first thing, at the outset, why did Russia not quickly win? Okay, this is just mind-blowing surprise to me. So I vividly remember the invasion started. I just couldn't believe what was happening. And the next day, one of my friends is head of strategy at a big Indian business group. And the group board, the holding company board, asked the head of strategy, saying, we want a briefing on this war. Okay, so what is this war and what are its consequences? And so she called me and she said, what's going to happen? And so you can imagine that first map. Okay, this is the map we were looking at the beginning. Okay, so now here's what I said essentially on the first day of the war, the second day of the war. Everything I said was wrong. Okay, I'm just telling you what I felt on this date. So now some of you will remember the history. That after 2014, there was a active conflict running in this region. There was significant. So Ukraine started out with a Soviet-style military, with lots of Soviet doctrine, Soviet manuals, and so on. NATO technical assistance started, so there was no significant weapons, there was no significant equipment. It was all Russian equipment sitting with Ukraine, and all of us know that Ukraine, the land area of Ukraine actually was a very rich, fertile ground for the engineering talent of the USSR and for the manufacturing of the USSR. Okay, so for example, the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva, was built at Odessa, and all the designers were Ukrainian. So in a way, when the time came to attack the Moskva, you could talk to the people who had designed the Moskva and who knew the Moskva inside out. Okay, so there was very little assistance from the West in terms of equipment. Ukraine had a very strong blast of Russian equipment, but Western technical aid started coming, and they started the process of turning Ukraine from a Soviet-style force to a Western-style force. Okay, and they started doing combined arms in a Western way. They started organizing it in something that was like what the Russians were trying as the battalion tactical group, more like the US Marines, the way the US and the way Western armies are organized. And this was called the JCF, Joint Command Force. Okay, so that was NATO technical aid was coming in, and there were about 60,000 soldiers in this region facing off the DPR and LPR militias. They were actually Russian forces, but they were called DPR and LPR. I knew that. So I knew that the real military combat power of Ukraine was in JCF, the Joint Command Force, which was like a modern Western training of combined arms warfare, layered on top of a Soviet-style force with no Western equipment. It was all Soviet equipment, it was all Russian equipment, but with Western concepts and doctrine and philosophy of war. I knew that they were here. So when I look at this map, I start thinking that, if there are opportunities to score breakthroughs here, then you cut off this, and then you're done. Because actually all that Ukraine has is 60,000 JCF. Apart from that, there is no military capability there. So I said to her that the greatest danger is that some of this stuff will get to these roads, and if the Russians are able to rapidly close this and block off the possibility for JCF to exit, then basically it's the end of Ukraine as a modern military. Then you will have a horrible insurgency on your hands. I said that Ukraine will be cut in two. There will be an east and a west. The eastern side will all be conquered by Russia, and you will have an insurgency that will make Afghanistan seem like a walk in the park. Okay, because by that time I understood that Ukraine was in no mood to give up their sovereignty. They deeply hated the Russians, and they were going to fight like hell, and the West would give them equipment. So if you could arm jihadis with stingers, then the kind of things that could be done here is unlimited. You have a land border with Poland and so on. So there was no limit to the way in which an insurgency could be organized. So my prediction was that there's a decent chance that the Russian army will be able to close the pincer. Okay, this starts looking like a cauldron in old Soviet doctrine, and the JCF would be captured, and that's the end of Ukraine as a fighting force. And then after that, you'll have an insurgency from hell. That if Russia thought they had problems in Afghanistan, that is nothing. What they would get here would be a complete nightmare. And I also anticipated that the West would be able to inflict horrendous economic damage on Russia, all that stuff. But this was my baseline, that they're going to win. I had no doubt that Russia was going to win. So we're all shocked and surprised. What the hell went wrong? Okay, like how did Russia not win in the early days of the war? Okay, so there are very interesting reasons and explanations, and today I feel we have a reasonable understanding. Okay, so question one, at the outset, why did Russia not win? I feel there are two levels of an answer. Okay? So I'm first going to give you what I think is a more superficial answer, it's a more military answer, and then I'm going to show you that the larger context, that the mandate given to the military was a wrong one, and it's a mistake of the bosses that something was asked. So let's go through it in two steps. First, why did we believe Russia would win? Because you do any kind of calculations and you see that Russia has everything in excess. Okay, Russia has more planes. Russia had about 2,000 planes. Ukraine had 100 planes. Okay, Russia had more artillery. Russia had 10,000 tanks. Ukraine had 1,000 tanks or 800 tanks. Russia had more soldiers. The Russian mobilized, the full mobilized army at the time was about 250,000, and 50,000 have to be kept protecting all the other borders, and they had put 200,000 here. So 200,000 is a lot more than the JCF of 50,000-60,000. Okay? So you start counting in any way, then Russia is ahead. Okay? Russia is 3x bigger or 4x bigger, depending on how you want to count population or GDP. This is a little complicated because Russian GDP estimates are notoriously bad. Okay? So in a room of friends, I will also say Indian GDP estimates are notoriously bad. So let's not attach too much to GDP measurement. Lots of countries do this badly, we do this badly. But 3x, 4x, you can count, you can argue about how, but that is not how combat power works at all. Okay? Everybody in this room knows very well that if you count guns, you don't get the answer. Okay, there is much, much, much more to combat power and military affairs than counting. And my favorite example is the Yom Kippur War, 1973. Okay, so the 1967 war is spectacular. It is a 6 days war. I consider it one of the cleanest and most spectacular wins of modern times. It's a short war, 6 days, it is complete. Okay, it is magical. The Yom Kippur War was much harder for Israel. Okay, so Arab superiority in the Sinai region, depending on count soldiers, count tanks, everything, was about 11x, and Arab superiority in the Golan region was 10x. So the Golan Heights are near Syria, and Sinai is near Egypt. And when you put together all the components of the war, the Arabs had 2x the air power. And I already described that in the early 2 days, in the first 2 days when the Egyptians attacked, Israel had 300 tanks in that region and they lost 200. Okay, so that is how bad it looked. It looked absolutely terrible. Okay, and we all know what happened. Israel won. Okay, so we all know that in the end, even though the attackers had strategic surprise, okay, so it was a monumental political failure in Israel that they just didn't see this coming. The Israeli intelligence failed. They had warnings coming from their humans inside Egypt that a big next war is coming, and they just didn't understand it. It was a human failure at the top, going all the way to the top. They failed to see it. There was a simultaneous two-front attack. You can imagine how horrible that is. That both at Sinai and at Golan there was an attack, and there was crushing numerical superiority. I've described all this, and we know the outcome. The outcome is Israel won. Okay, I'm sure all of you have studied these things in great detail. I find the most fascinating piece here to be the problems of the sand and the water. Are you guys familiar with the detail of this? So both sides had to play on the sand of the Sinai desert and the interfaces between the sand and the Red Sea, which turns out to have physical problems of a kind that nobody had faced. So how do you play with tanks on that kind of crumbling, watery sand? It was something nobody quite knew. And both sides were using high pressure water hoses to disrupt the sand and move the sand. And all this was not terrain that had ever been studied. Okay, so what I find is the most amazing moment of the 1973 war is that Israeli scientists and engineers came to battlefields under fire and were doing experiments with the Sinai sand in order to measure technical coefficients. And then they went back and they developed bridge laying equipment and modifications to tank treads and so on. That is the kind of intellectual power through which wars are won. And we all know the answer, Israel won. So our first answer will be, yeah, Russia had lots of numbers, but numbers don't win wars. Something else does. And clearly Russia was lacking in all that. And this is the first phase of the military analysis which started coming out, that Russia has poor training and leadership. They still suffer from Soviet-style top-down control. They haven't got to the Western way of war, where there is empowerment at every level. That at every level, this is the Prussian, German school of war, that at every level, some part is an instruction, some part is complete autonomy. That you are in front of a hill, you figure out how you will attack the hill. HQ will not tell you what to do. So this is something that is not there in the Soviet style. There is massive corruption in the Russian military. Russian logistics is notoriously bad. Then there was an odd failure around air superiority. They were just not able to confront Russian SAMs sitting with the Ukrainians. And so effectively the Ukrainians got air denial. And by all accounts, the front was too long. That given the amount of combat power that Russia actually had, they didn't need to disperse their forces all along that front. I mean, imagine if all that resource had just come through Belarus to Kiev. Okay, they would have got through. They would have probably done better. Instead, they were diffused across too long a front. These are all military reasons that are given, and there is something to that. I think that in recent months, the picture has become more clear. Okay, so one of the amazing things about this war is that the Russian establishment is leaking a lot. There are lots of enemies of Putin who are regularly bringing out facts and intelligence and documents. So it's like an old communist environment where many people had a principled objection against communism, and they kept supporting the enemies of the country, hoping to help bring down the regime. So a lot of good knowledge has come out about those early days. We now know blow by blow about what memo was written by who and who said what in which meeting. A lot has leaked out, and I think this. Oh, sorry, I just want to show you this picture. Have you seen this video? Has everybody seen this video? It's one of the most hair-raising videos from the war. Okay, so what was happening here is that this is a bunch of Russian tanks coming from Belarus towards Kiev. Okay, so every tank commander here will look at this and say, what the hell are you guys thinking? Okay, these are tanks that don't have an infantry escort. And there are houses on both sides which can conceal weapons. And you would think that every Russian schoolboy knows how tanks were used in World War II. This is not how tanks are used in World War II, leave alone modern conflict. But this is how the tanks came. And I was not able to correctly embed the video in this, and I wanted to be very cautious that we have no mistakes in this display. But when you play this video, the Ukrainians basically pull off a perfect ambush. That they kill the front tank, then they kill the last tank. Okay, then all these guys are blocked in the middle, and then one by one they're taking off individual vehicles. Okay? Now this is basic. In the first 3 months in army training, you would be showing people that don't have this massed group of tanks in a small physical area where even relatively imprecise artillery will end up hitting something, and tanks must always go as part of a complex formation. It's just like you have to protect the aircraft carrier. If you send an aircraft carrier alone, it will not work. Like a tank will never work. And we know this since the First World War. So what were they thinking? And this just goes to fundamental failures of training. Wasn't there any individual in all this and in the leadership who said, you guys are doing something wrong? Okay, so this is a kind of military explanation that the Russian army is a very weak force. They don't know how to do this stuff. Okay, so they have forgotten everything about the Second World War. That we think the world of the Red Army, the greatest land army of the world, is standing in 1945. This is not the Red Army of 1945. I mean, this is a bunch of school children. They don't know how to do this stuff. Okay, so this is a military type explanation that today's Russia is not Zhukov and Rosokovsky of 1945. They have forgotten how to fight war. This was the early weeks after the failure. I want to say to you that in the last 5 months, we've got beautiful documentation from inside the Kremlin at the highest levels. Lots of intelligence has come out, lots of stories have come out, and this is, I think, my best assessment as of today. It failed because it was not designed as a military operation. Okay, so FSB and Putin believed that the Ukrainians would not fight. FSB and Putin claimed that they had intelligence, and the FSB, with the benefit of hindsight, we know they were wrong. So the directorate within the FSB, which worked on this, was the directorate that was led by Putin when he was in the FSB. So it was all his guys. He felt sure he knew what they were saying. And what they were saying was that, sir, these people, they have no fight in them. Okay? They appealed to Crimea, that we conquered Crimea and the Ukrainians gave up without firing a single shot. They have no stomach for a fight. Okay? And that was true in 2014. But things changed, because once the fighting started in the Donbass, then under pressure, Ukraine learned to build a military capability. And as I said, they built the JCF and they started turning it from a Soviet-style force into a Western-style force. So this assessment that the Ukrainians don't know how to fight was not correct, but that was the intelligence assessment. So it was designed as an intelligence coup. It was designed to be Crimea in 2014. That if I show them so many tanks, they will shake in their boots and then give up without a fight. That was the FSB and Putin theory. So the mandate given to the military was not to design an invasion. Okay, why would you fail so horribly on logistics? If you designed an invasion, you would have a logistics trained with that. The answer is, the military was not told to design an invasion. The military was told to go show some tanks and the other side is going to collapse. Okay, so that was an intelligence assessment. So by this reasoning, it was a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of the leadership to roll the dice and bet on the intelligence, to believe that the intelligence was correct. And then the mandate given to the military was a wrong one. The mandate given to the military was not to figure out how to invade Ukraine, but it was to go show lots of force, and the Ukrainians are going to get terrified and they're going to collapse. So that is why the Russians thought they're doing a parade. They should take all those tanks and go to Kiev. They didn't think we were going to fight. And in fact, Ukraine stood and fought. And then the whole thing melted, because if you've not designed for a fight, then no, it's not going to work. Okay, so this is our modern understanding, and this is just the last 5 months, a series of beautiful documents and evidence from individuals who were there in the room has started trickling out. This may also be a certain amount of cover your ass by Sergei Shoigu and Gerasimov, that don't blame us for the rubbish that happened. Like in the beginning, we were not told to fight a war, we were told to go do a parade. It can also be some amount of that. So some mixture of all these things happen. Okay? So this is the first thing we learned about why did Russia not win quickly. Because all of us in this room, we thought Russia is going to win quickly. Okay. Second, I want to talk about transparency of the modern battlefield. There is a old phrase, revolution in military affairs, which has been talked too much and it has become a bit of a cliche. Some people have become cynical, you get eye rolls, right? Because RMA has been said too much. So I've been hearing about this for too long a time and hearing too much hype around it. So I also was a bit skeptical. Okay? But I want to say, in this war, something big has happened in terms of transparency in the modern battlefield. You may never get precisely these conditions again. So I'm going to describe these conditions to you. You may never get precisely these conditions again, but these conditions are hellish in terms of transparency. Okay? Ukraine knows more than the Russians ever imagined. Okay? More than anybody ever imagined. Their intelligence is unmatched. How did that happen? Okay? So step one, every Ukrainian citizen is armed with a mobile phone which has a GPS reader inside it. Okay? So every photograph that is taken is a camera with a GPS reader built in. It's an unprecedented level of intelligence. So all over the country, there are Ukrainian civilians who hate the Russians, who are quietly taking photos. The Ukrainian government built encrypted channels through which from your cell phone you can safely send those photographs and videos to HQ without getting caught. Okay, so there are Telegram channels where this stuff is happening. There are also direct channels by which this is happening. And so you've got very large number of locals who are capturing intelligence all the time and sending it back to HQ. Ukraine is a country which is a bit like India with lots of IT capabilities. So just like India is an IT superpower, Ukraine is an IT superpower. They're very, very strong on computer technology. They had the detailed knowledge of every single mobile phone system and computer network and surveillance camera that was in the occupied territory. So they were generally able to get into those systems or break into those systems, and suddenly every surveillance camera is giving Ukraine a feed about one house or one building or one street or something. Then Ukrainian partisans, what they would do is, like, there's a building, there's a surveillance camera pointing at a gate, okay, like we would do, right? In our complexes in India, we have many surveillance cameras. It should be like pointing at a gate because you want to keep track. So quietly a partisan would turn it to the side where it's looking over a Russian military installation. Okay? So suddenly you have a surveillance camera on the military installation. So all over the country, there was high level of engineering knowledge that was used to obtain information. Of course, they use mobile phone networks and public internet. So Russian soldiers were getting into conventional civilian mobile phone networks and the internet, and all this stuff was being intercepted. Okay? Because the Ukrainians had extreme knowledge of how to attack all these systems, and it was their own systems. So they knew this from the inside, and they had all the requisite passwords, and so this was a hell for the Russians. Then came the drones revolution. All of us know a lot about surveillance drones and so on. What I want to say is the one phrase that has caught me by surprise is now drones are used like ammo. The Ukrainians are going through 10,000 drones a month. So just imagine that. Every month they're losing 10,000 drones. I don't know what is the size of their fleet. Is it 50,000? Is it 100,000? I don't know. But they are losing 10,000 drones a month. They are buying and making 10,000 drones a month. So drones are now like ammo that you just keep on using them. You lose hundreds every day, and that gives you an unprecedented battlefield view. Then thermal imaging has become cheaper and better. So all of us are familiar with thermal imaging. It used to be more exotic military technology, and increasingly it has become consumerized. The sensors are available at lower and lower prices, and you're able to buy a lot of low-grade thermal imaging at modest prices, and they've flooded the space that civilians have thermal equipment whereby they're able to watch the Russians at night. Okay. Then the amazing thing is NATO intelligence. So now you are up against a superpower. There is no intelligence force in this world more powerful than NATO intelligence. Their capabilities are out of the world. So now look at the map closely in your mind. NATO ISR flights are taking place all over NATO territory and the international waters of the Black Sea. So the plane is flying there and is looking down into Ukraine and into the battlefield. So they're doing these flights 24 hours a day, and they're capturing an amazing amount of intelligence, where in a way, never has the Russian side faced the wrath of NATO like this before, because the capabilities in NATO intelligence are unmatched.
And
Yes.
when this war began, everybody knew that the war is going to take place.
The West knew that the war was going to take place. All the way till the end, Zelensky believed it was not going to happen.
But I think all of us knew that
Yes.
it's a matter of time before,
Okay.
And did the NATO, Ukraine is like a front. NATO was there, the CIA was there. They were training the Ukrainians. I think they had a blueprint that if Russians come. I'm only suggesting.
So I've not seen evidence of that. NATO was training JCF. There's no doubt about that. But the entire program, so I've seen the documents of the program.
What the Russians lured into this fight?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is just Putin's decision to do this. So NATO was definitely training JCF on the Western way of war. So all the things we know, how to do combined arms, how to do empowerment at every level of the battlefield, how to do maneuver warfare, not stand. So digging a trench is not the Western way of war. It's always mobility. Okay, those kinds of things. So they were learning the Western way of war with all Russian weapons. So all the way till this conflict, there was no Western weapons coming in. Okay. The NATO intelligence assets were always there, are always there. So NATO doesn't need this war to have those assets. They just were always doing that. So they have intensive daily, multiple flights a day, covering every perspective from which you can see the battlefield, which is the border of Moldova. So Moldova has not given permission for NATO overflight. So the planes stop at the Polish border, and they do use Hungarian airspace, but they don't use Moldovan airspace, because Putin has installed 1,500 militia in another fake country called Transnistria, which is inside Moldova. So Moldova is in a very awkward political position. They may turn into a Russian vassal state, like has happened with Belarus. So Moldova doesn't give permission. So they fly at the Polish border, the Hungarian border, and they fly in the international waters of the Black Sea. And they have the world's best planes that do intelligence gathering, and they look across hundreds of kilometers into the battlefield. Last is the spy satellites. NATO spy satellites are the best spy satellites in the whole world. They build the best sensors. They fly low Earth satellites. Nobody in the world has spy satellites like the American spy satellites. Finally, human. Putin is a much hated dictator, and lots of people in the Russian establishment are giving data to the West, are giving facts to the West. So all of you will notice in the weeks leading up to the war, British and American intelligence were doing a remarkable thing. They were taking documents that they had obtained from inside Russia and releasing them on the internet. So the entire war plan, the entire battle plan, the invasion plan was released on the internet, saying, see, we know you're going to do this, and we know that this is your war plan. So trying to scare off Putin and say to him, don't invade. Because that the invasion plan is a great asset for the Ukrainians in trying to mount a defense. Unfortunately, Zelensky just did not get this one right. Zelensky did not believe an invasion was going to happen. Till the very end, he refused to mobilize his people, and so the military opportunity of using the invasion plan didn't really go well. But it was an intelligence coup. Now, put yourself in the shoes of US and UK intelligence. Okay, if one human source in the Kremlin gives you an invasion plan, you don't like to leak it because potentially it can be traced back that only one person was given that version of the file, right? So then you can catch that person. The fact that they leaked the plan says that they got it from 4 sources. So you cannot triangulate and figure out where you got it from. So it is just a complete penetration of the Kremlin. Every step of the way, they find out all these things and they release it in newspapers. So that in a way they're playing mind warfare with Putin, who's really an intelligence man. They're saying to Putin, your establishment hates you. Your establishment has been completely penetrated by us. We have human inside your people. There are things that you cannot get by SIGINT. So, I mean, Western SIGINT is of course great, but they have human. They have dozens of people inside the Kremlin who hate Putin and are giving documents. So that is another great source of intelligence. So when I put all these pieces together, I'm sure you will appreciate all these pieces together: NATO intelligence, thermal imaging with both military and civilians at night, drones, hacking into computer systems and surveillance cameras all over the occupied territory, and every Ukrainian citizen is an intelligence officer. When you put all this together, the problem is you get flooded with information. Okay, there's an information overkill. So there's really an IT challenge of how to stay organized. And partly there are software systems in the West that have been given to Ukraine for doing this, and partly it is the genius of Ukraine that they have been building systems on the fly to manage this information load. I'm going to show you one more story of this nature about a homegrown system that the Ukrainians built to better cope with this. So there is a flood of intelligence, there's a flood of information, and it's a transparent battlefield of a kind that has never been there in world history. Never before in world history has there been such an advanced foe that the combination of Ukrainian citizens armed with mobile phones, breaking into networks, and then at the back, the 500-pound gorilla that is NATO intelligence. When you put all that together, this has never happened in world history. There has never been a war where there has been such an overwhelming intelligence effort. So that is my claim too, that something new has happened in terms of the transparency of this modern battlefield. What they know is amazing. Next I come to precision guided munitions. Okay, and this is, yes?
What was the role of Elon Musk and Starlink?
Great point, I forgot to touch upon this. So the sequence of events was like this, that so Starlink is a system which is satellite-based communications. You install it on your roof, and the company has hundreds of low Earth satellites. So above you, there's always a couple of satellites that your dish will talk to. And the satellites are very fast because they're low Earth, and they hand over to each other. So it's like in a mobile phone, we go roaming from one base station to another. Here, my base station is fixed, but I keep getting handed over from one satellite to another. Before the war, Ukraine had many land-based internet service providers, and they had one satellite-based service provider. At the point of invasion, the electronic warfare and the cyber warfare of the Russians managed to bring these systems down. Okay? So all over the invaded zones, there was one Western system, I'm forgetting the name, it just stopped working. That Russian hackers had found a flaw in that system, and on the day of the invasion, all those satellite dishes stopped working. And a lot of the land-based ISPs also stopped working. So Russian cyber attacks worked, and large chunks of Ukraine were then just disabled, they couldn't communicate. At that time, Elon Musk was running this Starlink system. He said, we're very happy if Ukraine will use our systems. He initialized it by giving some donations. He gave a few hundred dishes. Then after that, thousands of dishes were bought. So he's not doing any charity. He gifted 300 dishes at first. After that, thousands of dishes have been purchased. So he's making tons of money. For him, it's a business proposition. But what does it mean? It means that there is a very high quality internet support, which is there in the sky, and which Russia has not been able to bring down. There was apparently one flaw that the Russians found in their software, and they did an attack, and literally 1 or 2 hours later, Starlink was back up and running. So they found the problem, solved the problem, within 1 hour, they were back in business, and after that, they've never gone down. So Starlink had the technical knowledge to be able to hold Russian cyber attacks at bay, while the ground-based systems didn't have that capability, and that one other company, I'm forgetting, some European company, was attacked by Russian cyber warfare and it stopped working. Starlink is also playing another amazing role. There are drones in space who carry a Starlink, there are drones in the air who carry a Starlink dish. So there are drones who are communicating with the ground through Starlink. It's a completely new idea. So you sort of get a VPN into the internet, except that you're on a plane. See, otherwise a drone would need to do radio-based communication to the earth, and there are all kinds of problems there. So I haven't understood the engineering trade-offs. I don't know why that is better. I haven't understood why that is better. But I know for sure it is happening. That the Ukrainians have put Starlink dishes on some planes and they are doing command and control through the Starlink system. Next I come to precision guided munitions. Once again, that's an integral part of the so-called revolution of military affairs, and we roll our eyes, we think it is overhyped. Okay, but in the past, PGMs were exotic and few. All of us have experienced some PGMs. I'm sure in this room you have done experiments with PGMs, and PGMs have started happening everywhere in the world. And generally our mood was, and an army largely runs on old style stuff, and some PGMs are gradually coming in. And today there is now an array of PGM and it's happening on scale. Okay, so that's what I want to report to you, that I have been surprised at the amount of PGM that is in the fray. So let's look at the pieces. I don't know the comparable data for your equipment. I might be very curious to know the comparisons. The US M777 has a circular error probability of 50 to 200. Okay, and I was actually surprised. At a range of 40 kilometers, a normal artillery shell, not a GPS guided munition, a normal artillery shell has a circular error probability of 50 meters to 200 meters, depending on conditions. Okay, so that is the first step, and this is considered certainly vastly superior to what was there 20 years ago. I don't know how the Bofor's guns work, and I don't have precise facts about their CEPs. But the main line, so what happened was, when the war started, Ukraine was using Russian equipment, 152 millimeters, and then by June in 2022, they had completely run out of ammunition. So there is one factory in Czechoslovakia that makes 152 millimeter shells that is going to Ukraine. Apart from that, all the East European countries pulled out all the equipment they could and sent it to Ukraine, but there isn't any left because nobody is making Russian era weapons. All the East European countries have become members of NATO. They have moved to 155 millimeter equipment. So by June last year, there was a major crisis, and Ukraine was down to shell inventory of 5 days. That in 5 days more, they would have had been down to 0 shells. It was that bad. Then while the war was raging, they started switching over from the 152 millimeter standard to the 155 millimeter standard, and a big part of that was the M777 gun, particularly because it's so light. You may be aware, it's a titanium gun. It's only 4,000 kg. It can be dropped by one helicopter. Its barrel life is poor, but if you want rapid deployment, it's a very good thing. So rapidly, I think in the first batch 90 were brought in, and then after that hundreds have been brought in, and many other systems have been brought in. So I'm only going to focus on the Western equipment. I'm not going to look at the traditional Soviet 152 millimeters, which is the same on both sides. I have not been able to understand this deeply, and maybe all of you will help me understand it, but apparently an artillery shell at 50 to 200 millimeters CEP at a range of 40 kilometers is supposed to be the most precise artillery gun in the world today. And if you use something that they are calling the Excalibur GPS, and I've heard some things about this coming into India, a GPS guided round, then you get down to a CEP of 5 meters at a range of 40 kilometers. Okay, this is where you're getting PGM on an industrial scale. That I know 40 to 200, 50 meters to 200 meters is not quite precision, but it is still scary as hell. That if you can get rounds to, so imagine if it's 50 meters and CEP means probability of half. So if you send 10 rounds, then 5 will get to within 50 meters. That is heart stopping for many applications. So this is the terrifying thing. The second big thing is drones have emerged as forward artillery observers. You no longer have a man and a binoculars, you have a drone. And so then your ability to be close to the battlefield and read off precise features of the land. And now this links to, so I don't know what we call it here in India, but we have these artillery squares. So on a map, you make these squares, and each square has a number, so you have preloaded the coordinates, and you're able to rapidly target a gun to a coordinate. What is happening is when you look through the drones, you see physical features. You see a tree, you see a building, you see a traffic intersection. That is put into Google Earth. So people rapidly understand where we are. So the drone imagery is fed by a human operator, is seen by a human operator, and then they look at Google Earth. Then they understand that, oh, okay, fine, at this street intersection is my point of reference. Then they locate it on their artillery maps. and then you know which square. So this is done by skilled humans rapidly, but apparently it can be done very rapidly. So drone to squares mapping is done by a skilled operator, like in 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Because also see, these are locals, so they know their country. They know that this is a village where I have walked and this is a city where I have visited. So they're able to see the drone footage and rapidly understand that, oh, this is what you're talking about. Then they look at it on Google Earth, they verify that's what it looks like. They kind of put the vantage point, the point of view is the same of the drone on Google Earth, and then they take that into the artillery maps, and then they're giving back the coordinates to the gunner. Okay, the next is the famous HIMARS system, the MLRS. Okay, so all of us know the evolution from World War II, the Katyushka rockets, and for a long time in the West this was not done. Then in the 1973 war, Israel got religion about the value of these systems, and then reluctantly in America they started building it, and they just couldn't bear to build a bad system, so they just put a GPS guide on it. So it's like the American military stubbornly resisted rocket artillery systems for the longest time because their worldview is we have air superiority. Okay, so why do I need this? And they used to look down on the Katyusha as this is such an imprecise weapon, it's more for show, it's not a real weapon. So they gave every excuse. In the end, when the time came to do it, they said, okay, fine, we'll just put a GPS guide on it. So this has been a remarkably influential thing. Then like the GPS guided JDAMs, okay, standard American munitions where you take a 500 kg munition, old bombs, but you have a small GPS guidance kit that is loaded onto it. Then all of us are aware of the new wave of anti-tank guided missiles. That graphic is called Saint Javelin. Okay, this is a cultural icon in Ukraine. So this is some old medieval Ukrainian saint, and her drawing has been done holding a javelin. So this is Saint Javelin who protected Ukraine from the tank assaults. And then drones dropping grenades is precision guided munition. You're standing over a trench and you precisely send a grenade in a trench. Okay, and then you will ask, how are you sure? Because a grenade will drop vertically, but how are you sure your camera is not misaligned? And the answer is, you have to do a fair amount of electronics with gyroscopic stabilization to make sure that you're actually aligned. And the answer is, that is now well understood. So you can look down and you are sure I'm looking perfectly down. I'm on a plumb line, which is perfectly down. Then when you drop the grenade, it's dropping exactly down. You have a bullseye from the drone. So it's effectively a PGM. And finally is the thing that is called a kamikaze drone or a loitering munition, where a drone has small half kg, 1 kg payload, enough to take out a fuel truck, enough to take out an ammunition truck, enough to hit a trench, and it loiters with a human operator. A human operator sees a target, he guides it into the target. Again, it's a PGM in that it hits one truck, it can hit one command and control station. Think of it like a sniper. A sniper is trained that if you see an officer that all of us respect in your sniper scope, you want to take out that person. So those same properties are now being done using loitering munitions, that you see groups of people and you see where others are respecting this person, then I want to get there. So it's literally like a modern version of a sniper scope. What are the implications? If you see any high value target, you will hit it. Okay, so it's become a horrible place. You are not safe, and you will not waste an artillery round for one individual, but you will waste one drone dropped grenade for one person. So in a trench, if you see one individual, you will waste one grenade on that person. So what it has done is, it has really created a tremendous mental burden. So Western psychologists have interviewed Ukrainian soldiers who have come out of this battlefield, and they're saying that the post-traumatic stress is at a different level altogether. That you don't feel safe inside a trench. You can't go out to take a leak, because if you step out a little, you'll be seen by somebody and they'll come after you. One person is enough to make a drone come after them. So you're not safe inside your trench. You're not safe in your backfield. You can't walk around easily in the backfield. You're on alert all the time. So the rules about how to cycle soldiers into rest and recreation have had to be changed, because it's a mental stress, the kind of which has never been seen in traditional war. In traditional war, you're at the front, fine, it's very, very dangerous. But if you're under cover, you're a little safe. You come little backfield, you're reasonably safe. That's not the environment here. It's a brutal, grueling pressure on every person all the time. and people are cracking faster. So you have to cycle people through shorter tour of duty. And these are important things that we need to design for this age. Okay, my claim 4 of my surprise is, how do you want to think about ground attack aircraft? Okay, so why do we want helicopters or ground attack aircraft? Because you want to support the infantry. Because the infantry see an obstacle that I want to call in godlike power to clear one obstacle for me. Answer is PGM will clear that obstacle for you. So if PGM will destroy a machine gun nest or a field gun, then why do I need ground attack aircraft? Why do I need helicopters? For attack roles. Helicopters can still play logistics roles, they can evacuate, medevac functions. So I was just starting to say that in the old ways, the infantry would call in an attack aircraft or a helicopter because conventional artillery was so imprecise, you couldn't get one machine gun nest because the CEPs of artillery were hundreds of meters. But today, you can get one precise fire on one precise lat long. So if you get an accurate GPS reading, you'll be able to take it out from a distance. With standoff fires, you'll be able to get it. So now I don't need an attack aircraft anymore. So the whole question of air denial doesn't matter. I may have air denial for a military craft, but the damn precision guided shell will come through or the drone will come through. So I don't actually control my own airspace. Even if I claim I have so much air assets that I'm doing air denial. So our conventional notion of air denial, that I will prevent the other side's air force from operating or helicopters from operating, doesn't generate safety. So the PGM revolution changes the way we want to think about attack aircraft, about ground support. Ground support now is to be done through PGM. And I'm going to come to this immediately next. The last point, that this modern package of targeting precisely and PGM, effectively, it's like having your attack aircraft operating 50 kilometers in their backfield. Imagine I had air superiority and my attack aircraft were able to fly 50 kilometers behind the lines. Well, effectively I'm there. Because 50 kilometers behind the lines, I'm able to send my PGMs. So our thinking about air has changed because of all these things. Okay, now my 5th surprise is dangers behind the front, and I already started talking about it. In the olden days, things were dangerous at the front, but little behind the front. Okay, we would exercise caution, but we would build an entire infrastructure of command and control, ammo and fuel, multi-level systems for repair of equipment, barracks and hospitals. And when we wanted to develop an attack, we would develop concentration of force. For concentration of force, I would have to accumulate mass. Because if I don't accumulate mass, I'm not concentrating force. Okay, all this would happen behind the front. And then I would spring a surprise because I'm the attacker. Okay, this is all our old ways of thinking. Now the zone of danger is 50 kilometers behind. Because I'm only making the assumption that Ukraine has the HIMARS and they have no other Western style long range precision fires. They just have the 50 kilometer range precision fires. And they have very good sensors. They have very good intelligence. They have NATO spy satellites looking everywhere. So NATO spy satellites coupled with machine learning to detect standardized concealment mechanisms will see targets, and for 50 kilometers behind the battlefield, your life is miserable. So you're not safe 50 kilometers behind the battlefield. It is punishing. The mental pressure is really great. You're messing with the minds of the hierarchy because you could be staying 20 kilometers behind, you could be staying 40 kilometers behind. You're not safe. Real safety in the HIMARS world is coming only 50 kilometers behind. So the entire Russian leadership understands that zone of grayness, that when you go closer to 50 kilometers, now suddenly things can go wrong. Some Ukrainian civilian will leak a story that there are some senior officers here and a HIMARS strike will come in 10 minutes. Okay, so it's a punishing environment to operate in. So for those of us that are fascinated by World War II, I think we will all agree that the biggest and greatest operation of World War II was Operation Bagration. There was never a bigger military operation in the entire history of mankind. And we all remember the amazing Maskirovka of the Red Army. When you look at the entire operation in detail, it worked because by that time the Luftwaffe was blind. They were not there. The Red Air Force had complete control of the airspace and the Luftwaffe could see nothing. And they had no Soviet partisans. There was no Soviet citizen who was giving intelligence to the Nazis. And so you get these massive movements of troop and concentration, and first there's an attack here, then you put them all on trains, get them 300 kilometers away, you do the mass attack there. All those things are infeasible in today's world, because in the present Ukraine war, they're seeing everything. You can't do any surprise with concentration of force. You can't mass your troops, nothing will happen. Those trains start moving, intelligence will see those trains moving and send precise munitions to hit those trains while they're moving. Okay, so it's a completely different environment. You cannot do Operation Bagration anymore. And as I said, I'm surprised, because until 5 years ago, I would have thought roughly like that, you get air superiority, you try to do things like that. I think this war has been a surprise that now you can't do these things anymore. And I already talked about sensors behind the front who are continuously generating actionable targets. So there's a flow of targeting 50 kilometers behind the front, continuously Excalibur shells and HIMARS and other fires are coming down. So I already talked about long-range PGM being applied behind. So what are the implications? The biggest implication in my mind is that all the inventory, all the ammo, all the fuel, all the equipment has now got to be sent into smaller groups. You can't have a big base. You can't have a big ammunition storage dump, because somebody will see it and something will go wrong. So you have to have a large number of small ammunition stores. You have to have a large number of small fuel stores, because then anyone gets killed and it's okay. Of course, we need to work much harder on concealment. We need camouflage. So we need to hide things from the air. So assuming there's a Chinese foe, they have good spy satellites. So you have to assume that they have complete spy satellite coverage. And so the fuel truck has to be concealed. It has to be hidden. The fuel storage points have to be concealed. The ammunition dumps have to be concealed. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. So now let's think of assembling a force and mounting a concentrated attack. And I'm going to do a small one. Okay, imagine there are 1,000 people and 100 vehicles. Not a very large attack. Okay, so a modest operation, 1,000 people and 100 vehicles. Okay, if you will try to accumulate them to create a concentration of force, the enemy will pick that up. Either through partisans, because the Ukrainian civilians hate the Russians, or through satellite imagery. And then all you need for such a large assembly, right, 1,000 people and 100 vehicles, is quite a large land area. Then circular error probabilities of 50 to 200 meters work fine. 20 shells can ruin this entire thing. Okay, so imagine half of them will go wrong. 20 shells will completely destroy this agglomeration. And if what the Russians are saying is that if you're stable for 1 hour, an attack will come for sure. So kill loops have been as small as 1-2 minutes, and I'm going to describe innovations on the kill loop. But what the Russian side is saying in interviews is that you can't sit for 1 hour. If you have any significant force, you are there for 1 hour, the attack is coming for sure. Under no circumstances will they miss you. And think through the kill loop, spy satellites, information capture, send down actionable intelligence, fed to the correct artillery gun, and the return fire. So what will really work is small, highly mobile, highly skilled groups doing maneuver warfare. This is what this is telling us about the nature of war. It is not the old style of war, and this is not an ability that Russia has today. Okay, idea number 6, isolating the enemy in terms of logistics. What we know, old and new, and as I said, I learned many new things. The old idea was always cut off the enemy from their supplies. This is now possible on a breathtaking scale because of targeting and PGM. Okay, so again, little bits of history. In the days leading up to the D-Day landings, one of the very important tricks that the Allies did was that they drew a map of Normandy, counted all the railway and road links into Normandy, including bridges, and on the 3rd, 4th and 5th, on the 3 days, all these were blown up by French resistance fighters. Okay, so the idea was that Allies will struggle and get a toehold on Normandy and catch their breath and build some logistics. You know, they were going to drag a harbor in the so-called Mulberries. They dragged 1.6 million tons of a harbor to the beach, and then they start getting their supplies in that period. You're not ready for a panzer attack. So if large-scale movement of German troops happens in the first few days before you've gotten established, the whole plan would break down. So what they did was they isolated Normandy and said, you are not there. Whatever is here, we'll tackle here, but no fresh attacks can come from anywhere else. Okay, let's apply this in a more complex way. Can you destroy one bridge? Okay, so this is apparently a famous story of one bridge in Vietnam that the Americans wanted to destroy using only air power. So they were not there, they were not boots on the ground. It was on Vietnamese controlled territory. It took them a period of 7 years and hundreds of attempts to kill one bridge using only air power. Okay, and why is that? Because bombs thrown from a plane are horribly inaccurate, and bridges are actually very small targets. Okay, so just imagine, it took the United States 7 years to kill one bridge. Okay, PGM can now destroy one railway line or one bridge very easily. Okay? And what is worse, consumption rates of ammo and fuel have gone up. So anything we knew, so we all read thumb rules about the American war in Afghanistan, like I think it was, they need 40 gallons of fuel per soldier per day. So there were certain rates. But in those rates, you're fighting an insurgency, you're not fighting a conventional war. So the rates of ammo and fuel that are being used in this war are just out of the world. So you need more supplies than ever before. And the damn PGMs are interfering with the logistics. So there's a logistics crisis that has arisen. I have a curious question for you, and I don't know the answer, but I'm curious. Have breakdown rates gone up? Does equipment break down more? Does modern equipment break down more? So I'm just wondering that if you have this fiendishly complicated equipment, does it break down more? Does a Bofors gun break down more than a Russian gun? I don't know. If that's the case, again, if you have more complicated equipment, you need more of a logistics capability to bring back the damaged gun and repair it and send it back. So I don't know the answer. I'm curious about the reliability of modern fancy equipment. Whereas in the olden days, things were simpler and maybe they just lasted more. Okay, in the Kherson offensive, I already told you about a bridge. This is the Antonovsky Bridge. The Ukrainians used the HIMARS rocket to hit the bridge precisely. And within essentially 3 days, they knocked out the bridge. Okay? So remember I told you that the Americans took 7 years to take out one bridge in Vietnam. Here the Ukrainians took 3 days. And after that, the Russians built a pontoon bridge by the side of the Antonovsky Bridge. The Ukrainians destroyed that pontoon bridge using HIMARS. They could accurately hit a pontoon using the HIMARS. So modern PGM is completely a different game in terms of interfering with logistics. And as I said, the Russian force was isolated, and Sorokin made the call, in my opinion, the right one, that this is not tenable, and they executed a brilliant, well-organized retreat. Right now, in the Battle of the South, okay, so there's a lot of talk that Ukraine is making very little progress on the southern border, and that is correct. But what they are doing, and what not enough people are observing, is they have drawn a map in their eyes, and they are going after all the connections. So they are destroying the rail links, they're destroying the bridges. This is a critical bridge. This is one of the only bridges, there are only 2 bridges from Crimea up to Zaporizhia. This is called the Chonhar Bridge, and today is the 24th. On 22nd, attacks began on the bridge. The bridge is still working, but this shows you one bomb got through. 1 or 2 more will get through, and the bridge will be disabled. This is exactly like what was done to the Antonovsky Bridge. And then suddenly you've added 200 kilometers for a truck coming out of Crimea trying to get to Zaporizhia. They've already knocked out supplies coming in from Donbass into Zaporizhia. So I am just seeing the same story, that if I could read their minds, probably their invasion plan would be like this. That use PGM, destroy the logistics of the southern region, keep up the pressure as was done in the Kherson offensive, and the other side will run out of stores and they will realize what's good for them, they'll withdraw. It's cheaper, you don't have to fight, you don't have to lose so many dead people because the other side will withdraw. So that would be my design of their invasion plan, that go after the logistics, don't fight the people. Meaning you need enough of a fight so that the other side is using up supplies. So they feel the burn rate of supplies. Beyond that, you don't need to really win, because if you just win the logistics battle, it's game over. Okay, claim number 7, naval warfare for a land army. Okay, so Ukraine has no navy, but what we have learned is that land-based forces can generate area denial for naval warfare. Okay, and we all saw the sinking of the Moskva. Okay, what was done in the sinking of the Moskva? There was a land-based missile, the Ukrainian Neptune missile, which took out the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And they have created a whole zone surrounding all Ukrainian land where the Black Sea Fleet is too scared to operate. So they've effectively got an area denial done using land-based forces. Now, this actually is a very clever trick, and now I just want to stop to think about it. In the eyes of a radar, the sea is very plain, and then defense assets just jump out. So if you have a ship, if you have anything in the sea, it just jumps out. So if you're going to try to kill ships using ships, your ships are very visible, because in the background of the sea, the ships are very visible. Whereas in the eyes of a ship, the land is a lot of clutter. So concealment of your defenses on land is absolutely brilliant. It looks like a truck. You do a little more work for camouflage, and it's completely invisible. So even though ships have formidable ability to send fires down to the land, they can't see this. And that's what the Ukrainians have done. So all over their coast, they keep trucks and they keep them mobile. So I mean, the Russians do have some spy satellite coverage. They're keeping trucks and they're keeping them mobile, and effectively they've got full area denial done. Then they introduced naval drones. For the first time in modern war, a naval drone concept has been used. That they put a 500 kilogram high explosives inside a boat, and the boat has a video camera, and somebody is navigating it from a distance. And they sent these boats into Sevastopol harbor and started destroying ships there. And the Russian Navy has significantly retreated. They've taken out a lot of their naval assets out of Sevastopol harbor and put them further at the other end of the Black Sea. And I say this is the success of area denial. They managed to keep the naval assets at bay, even though I'm a purely land-based force. So this is a country that does not have a navy that is able to generate area denial in this space. Idea number 8. War is won by the clever. War is won by the nimble-minded. Not just people operating manuals and systems, but inventing on the fly. I want to tell you one story about 2014. Early days after 2014, the war started in Donbass. There was a lot of chaos. When you have civilians with mobile phones, you have too many targets. You get flooded with too many targets, and you have a confused set of fires all over the country. The Ukrainian army was a mess. So after 1991, they had never actually taken care of the inherited Soviet-style force and organized it properly. So they were in a complete mess. So they came up with a creative answer. It's a system that they call GIS ATA. It's an interesting story. It will be fun for some people here to read it. Let me describe this idea. There are many fires all over the country, and headquarters does not know where the fires are. So just imagine the level of incompetence that I don't know where my guns are. Okay, fine, we are where we are. That the army is a confused mess. They don't have the GPS locations of all their guns, and some individuals have some anti-tank guns and some other fires. There are fires all over the place, and we don't know where they are. An intelligence fact comes through. Somebody says that there is this house where senior Russian officials are living. Okay, and at the HQ, what they have centralization at the HQ. They assess every piece of intelligence, make a call about its accuracy. So you cannot allow various random pieces of information to generate fires. So there is a systematic process of making a judgment that, okay, we have decided, we believe this, we've got this from multiple sources. In this house, senior Russian officials are living. Okay, so I've decided I want to send fires down to this house. At that point, what they do is they use a system that is GIS ATA, which is basically Uber. Okay, they stole the idea of Uber and they brought it into the world of artillery targeting. So on that open system, they send out a request. I want a kill at this lat long. Okay, all the fires in the country look at that like an Uber driver, and 4 of them say, I got it. Okay, like they say yes to the right. Okay, then HQ says that synchronize your rounds to land at 11:31:00. Okay, all 4 of them say yes, sir. Okay, so from 4 different points, you get 4 different fires, maybe 4 different technologies coming onto that one location at precisely 11:31:00. Okay, so decentralized targeting system where the guns choose whether I'm going to take a target or not. Each gun knows, am I short of ammo? Do I have enough ammo? So there's no attempt at central control. There's no attempt at management. Rather, it's radical decentralization. The fires know. Let the gun choose whether I will go after this target or not. You tell me, if you don't want to take it, it's fine. And this has reduced kill loop dramatically. It had another very interesting effect. Okay, all of you know Russian counter battery fire. Okay, so I've only read these things. You guys have operated the equipment. Okay, I envy all of you. You have such amazing experiences. I am just an armchair person. So Russian counter battery radar works by watching a battery sending many shells from multiple guns. So a battery is multiple guns, and averaging all that information to make a lat lock, because each one is imprecise. Okay, so the idea is that there are 5 rounds coming from here, and I'll average my reading for all the 5 rounds, and I'll get an accurate fix here. In this system, the 5 rounds are coming from all around. So when the averaging is done, the counter battery fire gets completely confused, and it sends a round in a completely wrong place. Okay, so this is just innovation on the fly. This is computer engineers looking at the world and saying, I'll solve the problem in a novel way. And this fits in a Western style notion of decentralization, that top does not tell bottom what to do. I want to get around to this target. That's a centralized decision, because we need to judge the quality of the intelligence. We need to prioritize. There'll be many targets all over the country. So centralization of targeting, but not the implementation. Who will get what fire in how? Let local people choose. They will decide what is the best use of my ammo. I'm almost done. I have 10 lessons. My lesson number 9 is defense economics. It's about the production capacity of the military-industrial complex. Every country needs to think about the military-industrial complex. How do we produce? And most importantly, how do we achieve massive surge capacity? The surprise of this war has been the surge. The consumption rates are just out of the world. They're ridiculous levels of consumption rate. So let me give you an example. The US was manufacturing javelins at 3,600 a year. Okay, the glory of the United States fiscal system is for every weapon you get the exact amount of money sanctioned to produce 3,600 per year. So you get this exact data coming out in public domain. Everybody is able to see. So the defense priorities of what they're spending to make what is all there in the public domain. So I was able to assemble this exact fact that pre-war the US was making javelins at 3,600 a year, and at its peak in the early days of the war, Ukraine was using 500 a day. Okay. Now the rates went down because the Russians understood it and they stopped sending tanks out in the front. Okay. So in a way, the Russian assault choked and stopped, because how do you make progress without tanks? But 600 a day is a ridiculous rate of consumption, and this is true all across the space. You look at anything that is being used in Ukraine today, it is challenging the military-industrial complex. There are numbers that are unheard of. Europe is gearing up to make 1 million shells a year, and various countries are trying to put factories to work. It's very difficult to meet the rates of this war. Russia is of course struggling because they are alone. Yesterday I read that one Chinese company has sent high explosive or old gunpowder, I was not able to tell, to Russia. And some Chinese drones are going to Russia. The Iranians are sending Shahid drones to Russia. North Korea is sending 155mm shells to Russia. Other than that, Russia is alone. And that's where you get to Western sanctions. Modern war is intricately complicated. Everything is internationalized production. You need semiconductors, you need specialized materials. Everything is in a complex web of global production. So it's very easy for us to say self-reliance, but really it's generally infeasible, or it will drive up the cost like crazy. So yes, we should hold inventory. Yes, we should do self-reliance. But to realistically do self-reliance is very hard, as Russia is now discovering. They are apparently cannibalizing chips out of washing machines to put them on guided missiles. So at the receiving end, people have taken open guided missiles, and they are finding consumer grade chips that have been cannibalized from washing machines. They are in that kind of dire straits. And you know how hard it is to build semiconductors. So I believe Semiconductors Limited in Chandigarh is making some chips for ISRO. But it's very hard to do it at any meaningful scale, at any practical scale. China can go against the West. They've got some decent semiconductor manufacturing capacity. Nobody else can. Specialized materials, like M777, a complete titanium gun. And the specialized materials that go into that are just very hard to manage. I have written an article on this, and I request you all to read it. And I want to say it in one line. The game is, we want more surge capacity. Okay, we all agree that the conduct of war requires ridiculous levels of surge capacity. But then you can't ask for infinite money. So as an example, I could say, look, I want to keep 20 million shells in store. Yeah, you can do that. But it costs a lot of money first to make the shells, and then they have a finite life. And if a war doesn't come, you're wasting all that stuff. So the question arises, how do you achieve significant surge capacity at the lowest possible cost? And that's where defense economics comes in. And I have some ideas on how to do it. Whenever there is interest, I'm happy to discuss separately. But all over the world, this is a question people are worrying about. That there is peacetime and there is war, and then when the war comes, modern high-intensity conventional war, because of so many sensors, has too many targets. And so the use of ammo is just out of the world, and then we need to be ready to make equipment on a ridiculous scale. And not just ammo, so see, because the other side has PGM, they're destroying my guns. Because the other side has PGM, they're destroying my tanks. I have to make everything. I have to have surge capacity for everything. This is World War II, even though it's only a short, small war between only two countries. It's back to World War II, where ultimately it was an industrial war, and ultimately it was, America, the arsenal of democracy, that won the war because they just outproduced everybody. Okay, fun fact for everybody. In what year did the Americans push back and shut down tank production? Okay, the answer is 1943. So America entered the war in December 1941. And at that time, the giant was asleep. Okay, so when the Pearl Harbor attack happened, the giant was asleep. In 41 and 42, they made so many tanks that with all their forecasts, they couldn't see these tanks being used. And in early 44, they shut down tank production. The war was far from over. But once that giant industrial might got going, it's an unbelievable level of production. Okay? They made 30 aircraft carriers within those 4 years, within those 3 years. Finally, point 10, fighting a big belligerent neighbor. For me, my passion about this war is related to India and China. Okay? A lot of the ratios of Russia and Ukraine are the ratios of China and India, and in fact it's more adverse than that. Russia and Ukraine, generally the ratios are 3 to 4. That Russia is 3x bigger, 4x bigger. The Chinese GDP is 5x bigger than India. So we are in a bigger problem when confronting China than Ukraine is when confronting Russia. Okay? Lieutenant General Patankar knows, as part of the work of Pune International Center, when the fighting started at Galwan, we mobilized ourselves to build a book on this question. This was jointly done between Vijay Kelkar, Ramesh Mashelkar, Gautam Bambawale, Ajit Ranade, Ganesh Natarajan, and myself. We wrote a book on how the hell should India confront this monster. Okay, and we recognize that they are 5x bigger than us by GDP, and that scares the hell out of us. We are really frightened of somebody having 5 times your economic might. And then all the other things I described, that the Chinese can actually withstand Western sanctions and build 15 nanometer chips. Whereas really the Indian semiconductor capability is 90 nanometers. There's a very feeble CPU that can be made in using a 90 nanometer process. So we're very scared of China, and I'm sure it keeps you awake at night too. All of us are terrified, but this war gives me a lot of hope. It shows that a lot is possible. That you can be a feisty, scary, small guy who can give hell to the big guy. So, like what is being talked about Taiwan, that can China invade Taiwan? Taiwan is a porcupine in terms of defense. They will make life so miserable for China that China will think twice. And I feel that is a message that we have to take away, that we have to think intelligently. We can't confront them frontally. So if Ukraine tried to say, I will have as many tanks as the Russians, it was never going to work. They have to be clever. How to disrupt the sources of Russian advantage, and how to be clever about it, how to outthink the enemy. China has, in a way, a similar problem as Russia. They are an authoritarian country with all the problems that go with that. You get a lack of intellectuals, you get a lack of criticism, you get a lack of debate, and so many, many mistakes will be made, same as Russia. So in a way that we should play to our strengths, that we're a free country, we bring the passion and energy of free people, and we have to outthink China. So in my mind, this war shows us that a lot is possible, and basically use quality to offset mass. Don't try to match mass. You can't match Chinese mass. What we have to do is outthink them. We have to beat them on military thinking. We have to beat them on rethinking doctrine, tactics, strategy, how to fight a high Himalayan war, how to neutralize the mess that Pakistan can make for us. We've got to outthink them. It's got to be a brain battle because it cannot be a mass battle. And we've got to build up a Taiwan-style porcupine defense. Again, everybody here I feel we should study what Taiwan is doing. Again, Taiwan is a glorious democracy. It's practically an OECD country. So all their defense documents are in public domain. So you can go download all their strategy documents. You'll see every detail of what they're doing. Everything is released in public domain. Okay, so now you think, like, should you really be releasing all those defense secrets? I thought about it for 1 millisecond and then I understood. If your job is to scare off the Chinese, you want to show them all those things. See, if I have lots of power and I keep it secret, the other guy will make a mistake and invade me and then discover to their dismay that we actually have a lot of defenses, but we get hurt along the way. It's better to build deterrence and then advertise it. Show them. Invite them for our military exercises saying, see, this is the reception we have prepared for you. So you will think twice before choosing to invade India. So that's what the Taiwanese are doing. They are laying a porcupine defense and they're releasing all documents in the public domain. So the Chinese fully know, they are warned that don't you dare mess with me. It will become very costly for you. And finally, the whole system of alliances, what South Korea does for its defense, what Taiwan does for its defense, what Ukraine did for its defense. Nobody can deal with a belligerent neighbor alone. Okay? For 25 years, for 50 years, India will not match the GDP or the technological sophistication of China. So our only hope is alliances. We have to go embrace everybody else in the world who does not like China, and there are plenty. So all over the Chinese border, South Korea, Vietnam, Japan, Taiwan don't like China. We have to embrace everybody in our neighborhood. We have to try to solve problems in our neighborhood so that countries in our neighborhood should feel we want to help India when India is attacked. And of course, the West wants to contain China's rise. It works great for us. So we have to build alliances. So I'm done. I just want to do one last thing that really caught me at a very deep level. So war is hell, and all of you know this better than anybody else, that no country should have to face the horror of modern war. Modern war is a nightmare. But I keep arguing with Kelkar all the time. Vijay Kelkar is my dear friend, is my mentor, has brought me up since 1999. He's very deeply pacifistic. He just keeps on saying, we should not fight. And I say, no, insisting that war is aberrant didn't rule out war. Okay? You've got to have a military capability. Okay? And as I say there, you're striving in this room, all of you in this room, you're striving, you're putting your life on the line, creates the possibility of my freedom. Okay? So I understand that and I'm very grateful for that. And we have to do this and we have to do this well. And can I overrun by 3 minutes? I have a funny story.
Please go ahead.
Mark Milley is the US chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So he's the highest soldier in the American hierarchy. There was a very unpleasant moment where there were some protesters in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. and they were being brutally beaten down by the police. And Donald Trump tricked Mark Milley to go with him to Lafayette Square, acting like there is military support for beating protesters in Washington, D.C. Okay? Which is just not done. Which is, the military should be apolitical. The military should not support a government in beating up protesters. That's not the job of the military. And Mark Milley was deeply uncomfortable about what happened. He was tricked. He was not told that there is a problem with police beating up protesters. He was just told, come with the president. And he said, yeah, I'll come. And he immediately went public. So the next day, he went public to the press, saying my being there was a mistake. Okay? So he's been under quite some controversy about these issues. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he does something remarkable. He regularly accepts speaking invitations to go to a speech at a coffee shop. Okay? One neighborhood coffee shop will call him, little 40-50 people audience all over the country. He just quietly goes and does a speech at coffee shops. Okay? And his message is basically this, that the glory of the United States is freedom. We have freedom of speech, we have freedom of press, we have freedom of religion, we have freedom to assemble, we have freedom to protest, and the military is willing to die to protect those freedoms. He just keeps on saying it over and over. And he talks about this feedback loop, that freedom is what makes the West great, is what gives the West leadership in all the technology and ideas. So the lethality and the Western way of war, the fact that they have the best M777 round and the best spy satellites and the machine learning algorithms that will process the spy satellite imagery is the product of the freedom. And that freedom is what makes a powerful military force. and the military force upholds the freedom. So that is the feedback loop that all of us should understand, and I just want to say to all of you, I'm grateful to you.
Can I have a question?
Yes, please.
Sir, I'm Brigadier Yogesh Kulkarni, sir. Sir, one of the causes of Russia not doing well is its command and control failure at various stages. Now, historically, there is a similarity between the strategic construct and the command and control of Russia and China.
Yes.
So, I, as an Indian Army soldier, do I have some lessons to learn while dealing with China, as there are similarities between the command control structure in both the countries. And second thing is that the Russian conscripts apparently have not done well. So does it put a question mark on the concept of conscripts, their combat efficacies? Thank you.
All fascinating and important questions. I agree with all the things that you're headed to. Let's go piece by piece. The Red Army last saw action in 1979 in the Vietnam War, and we know how badly that turned out. Vietnam was a world-class force. The Americans had left in 75. In 79, the Red Army looked really bad when compared to them. They have never faced combat ever since, and this matters. So experience, being in the field, it matters. Chinese corruption is like Russian corruption. Okay, and by the way, I want to say that for all your gloom and pessimism about Indian corruption is not as big a problem as what you know in Russia and China. Okay, Indian corruption is not out of line with the averages seen of countries of our level of income. So India is actually surprisingly a decent country in terms of corruption. I know that's not the rhetoric around the world. Please invite me back for a 1-hour talk on Indian corruption. I'll do that separately. But for the present question of combat effectiveness, Chinese corruption is on the scale of Russian corruption. And we saw a lot of the horror of what happened in Russia was just corruption. People were ripping out parts out of tanks and selling them. And you may think you're stealing $1,000 of equipment from a tank, but it renders a $3 million tank combat ineffective. So Russian corruption was legendary, and Chinese corruption is similar. The strategy and the tactics of the Soviet army continue to live in the Chinese army. So for all these reasons, I think that there is a lot of implications of how Ukraine fought back. To me, is a story of how we will fight back. So for me, I'm fascinated by this war because I'm Indian. That I see this as a playbook. Earlier, when we wrote the book, we were just frankly gloomy. How the hell are we going to deal with this? Somebody with 5x the GDP, how will we ever compete? This war gives me hope that the little guy can compete, and it's by cleverness, it's by capability, it's by bringing in that Western way of war and management of the military force to confront that Soviet style force. By the way, the Chinese are intensively studying all the same things. So there is excellent documents coming out from within China on lessons of the Ukraine war, and they are also saying a similar thing. What you say about conscripts is 100% perfect. Conscripts were basically for the time of Napoleon. Okay, ever since that, conscripts have done badly. The level of training required is too much. Also, so first you get trained with your gun, then you get trained to be the infantryman that supports a tank, then you get trained on doing comms, you get trained on using a drone. Okay, that's just the amount of training that has to go to do combined arms. It's way beyond what is feasible for any conscript. And to do combined arms warfare, you have to trust. It requires an incredible level of human trust that you are the infantryman standing outside the tank. I am inside the tank. I say something to you, it puts your life at risk. Or you say something to me, it puts my life at risk. You need amazing level of spirit, the core, and camaraderie and trust to be able to actually do the things. A conscript will not do that. When you tell a conscript to put their life in risk, they will disobey. So I think conscripts are a complete fail, and we should not go down that route.
I have
Yes, please.
a suggestion.
Yes.
I might have to get up. Can you hear me without the mic?
Yes.
Use the mic so that others can hear us.
Dakshin Bharat there, can I have a comment? Sorry. Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I know the two issues that I'm going to raise, you won't have the time now to dwell on it at any length, but just as a food for thought for all of us who've listened to you, your fascinating presentation. One is cyber war. That is something that you haven't touched in the amount of detail that you would, because all of us are now seized of this particular facet of the new warfare. That perhaps the popular rhetoric is that tomorrow you can win a war without firing a single bullet. It's the cyber capability. So that's one aspect. Again, we'll probably have to invite you again to talk about that. The next one is the so-called tactical nuclear weapons.
Yes.
Is that a rhetoric, or is there any substance to it? Because for the world of me, I cannot imagine Putin, in whatever distress he may be at whatever time, would still employ tactical nuclear weapons in desperation.
If I may quickly respond, cyber war, agree completely. It's a lovely subject, it's an interesting subject. I just want to flag off to everybody that first assault at the top, which came from Belarus and Russia into Kiev, was also a triumph of cyber war and electronic warfare. The Russians managed to disable all the air defense assets of the Ukrainians. They disrupted the computer network. So you may remember there was a helicopter-based assault on the Hostomel airport. Hostomel airport is like Sahara airport to Bombay. Okay, and for some hours they had captured Hostomel airport, and transport craft had come into Hostomel airport carrying the Vadava and carrying equipment. It had become that bad that 13 kilometers from Zelensky's house was the Hostomel airport, and they had captured it for a couple of hours. How did that happen? How did helicopters get in? How did transports get in? The answer is, at that moment the Russians had completely used cyber attacks to destroy the air defenses of the Ukrainian side. So these are very important things that we need to study. We also need to study how the Ukrainians came up with responses, how all consistently within a couple of hours they were able to get their systems back up. So we need to think deeply about how that was done. So their story to us will not be that it's a resilience story as in hardening. It's a resilience story as in roll with the punches. If you get punched, pick yourself up, come back, fix your systems, just repair, keep innovating, come up with something new. So see it as a continuous flow of punches rather than a one time that I have a perfect system, nobody can attack it. There is no such thing. All systems have vulnerabilities. And sorry, after cyber. Nukes. Okay, this is a very interesting question. I didn't have time to bring it up. So every step of the way, I thought hard about the game theory from both points of view. Okay, that what would Putin do? What is optimal for Putin? As you know, it's the subject. Strategic nuclear doctrine is a subject of game theory. Game theory is a part of economics. I've done PhD courses in game theory, so I felt like I understand that, and I tried to do the first-person shooter for both sides. That what is optimal for Russia, what is optimal for Ukraine and NATO and the West. I can design an optimal nuclear strategy for Putin at the beginning. They squandered it by making too many casual threats. So many individuals in the Russian establishment casually made nuclear threats that if you give long-range fires to Ukraine, then we will move nuclear missiles into Belarus, okay, like that. And then again and again when those kind of things happened, they lost their potency. And I think on the NATO side, they played by the book, that for 50 years they have worked out nuclear doctrine. They know a lot about the steps. So it's a field that they call escalation management. So they all knew that in the end I want to give F-16s to Ukraine, but I can't do it suddenly. If I do it on day one, it might generate a bad outcome. So you work out the pathways to escalation, and the Russian side didn't have that cold Rand Corporation level brain power of how to play nuclear escalation. I don't know anything about the truth on the ground. I just want to report an Indian aspect to this. It is said in open source intelligence circles that India has promised that if Russia uses a nuclear weapon, then all Indian purchases of crude oil will stop. And today India is 51% of the Russian crude oil exports. So that's a significant play. There is no other income in Russia other than exporting crude oil and some other natural resources. So I believe that, no, I read this persistently from many open source intelligence sources, that the threats privately that the West has delivered to Putin are basically two things. One is that they say we have commitments from China and India that they stop buying all your natural resources. So basically, your money supply comes to a stop. And second, that F-35 planes will destroy the Baltic fleet within a matter of half an hour. And that's a $100 billion asset. So for using one stupid tactical nuke, do you want to waste $100 billion? These are the threats that have been privately delivered. We have no way of knowing this is true or false. This is stories that are trickling out into open source intelligence. I don't know the veracity.
Somebody, I think, station.
This is Dakshin Bharat area. Can you hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you for a very good lecture. I just wanted to add a comment, not a question, to the initial part of your lecture that why did Russia not change quickly. The inputs I think would be known to many in the audience. The plan has shown initially that they were to launch missiles from the north and south, and the land forces which moved almost 150 kilometers inside next to Kiev were to link up by air-land bridge. There was an airport which was supposed to be captured by the airborne forces of Russia. Now this information, again, maybe disagreement with that. Zelensky and the West had totally prepared themselves for the Russian offensive. So they didn't allow that airport to be captured. There is some information that there were almost 200 IL-76 airborne and paraborne forces ready to land on the airport. And had that infantry landed and linked up with the armor, and the team would have fallen. That was the broad plan. In fact, they didn't cater for contingency. So just another comment that the West is totally, in fact, there's a theory that the West lured Russia into the war, and now they are launching a proxy war. What the statement is, spending some billions of dollars to defeat Russia and remain it involved. However, Russia is not losing. So that is a different story on the other side. So this was just a small comment. Thank you.
That is indeed the Hostomel airport story that I was telling. And it's a heart-stopping story. It's an every hour matter. And if it had worked, just imagine that they were 13 kilometers from Zelensky's house. And for 6 hours, they actually control their airport.
May I now request the Army Commander for his concluding remarks.
Right at the outset, I would like to thank General Pathankar, sir. I think today we have a genius in the room, sir. And Professor Ajay Shah, it was really fascinating and mesmerizing to hear you articulate the operational concepts, the tactical concepts, and the strategic concept with such clarity that as a Army Commander, Southern Command, it really gladdens my heart because tomorrow's war are not going to be fought only by the army. I think tomorrow's war are going to be tackled by a civil-military fusion, and army definitely would be fighting in uniform. But I think the civilians at large also would be doing their role. And if we have some more people like you, sir, I think it would be a fascinating thing, especially in India. So you've given a very beautiful insight into a lot of things. While as military leaders, we have been looking at this conflict, with a very fine lens, and we have been drawing a lot of lessons. Most of the things that you have tackled are known. It's not that they are known; they are known. But the way that you have weaved it together, and you have thrown up certain, what you said that okay, this is what I thought that this is going to happen, but this is how it played out. I think that's more fascinating. That's possibly where our takeaways lie. And like I think correctly you mentioned in the last that yes, the same kind of a differential we have with China, and things today are at a stage we are not too sure as to how they are going to unfold, but we definitely have an active border. Not only one, but we have two active borders, and like I always say that they are not two, but possibly one border, because even the western border somehow will get fused into the northern borders, something like Ukraine. Even Pak also could be, so like Ukraine tomorrow if China wants to decide to have that kind of a conflict. You mentioned about the ISR part, the in-surveillance and the transparency that is there in today's war, and I think we will have to be prepared to fight in this kind of a transparent situation where everything would be visible. So definitely, I think small, agile troops would be the answer, not very huge massed attacks possibly. I think we'll have to really rethink, because so far what has been our thinking is, the large mass, we have the strike core, we have the big elephant. But then those strike core can always be very quickly configured into the IBGs. That is what the Indian Army today is talking of. The IBG concept which we have already outlined, to some extent, and even started. At least some of our formations are getting IBGs. And in times to come, I think possibly that is the way, and this war definitely has told us that this is the way. The second issue is about the technology and the role that it is playing. Again, a very, very important, while we all do understand the technology, but how do we apply? How do our TTPs change? I think that's a very, very important thing, and that's at all levels, right from strategy to operational to tactical levels. We have to really rethink about it. This is the second thing, and the third issue that you mentioned is about the logistics. As I have been a Director General of Logistics and Strategic Movement, and I do understand. They say that it is only the amateurs who deal with operational matters. The actual professionals deal with logistics. Logistics is the elephant in the room. If you plan your logistics correctly, you will, your operational plans will go, something like a hot knife in the butter. But if you have not planned your logistics well, I think then the best operational plan would not be able to go the way you envisage them to go. So logistics definitely is important. You mentioned again a very important issue, and this is about the surge capability. Everybody thought that these conventional conflicts are past, they are not going to take place. But here we are looking and staring at a conventional conflict, and which has not yet seen the end of the day. And today there is something which has already happened in Russia. I think most of you possibly may be aware. There is a lot which is happening in Moscow. So we have no idea as to how things are sort of going to unfold. So the surge capability, your capability of the country to sustain long-term conventional conflict, I think holds the key. Do we have that kind of a military-industrial complex? I think that is the answer that we are looking at. I think this issue of Atmanirbharta has come possibly just at the right time. Because when we are in Southern Command, and this is something like the base as far as the heavy industries is concerned, and wherever I go, I normally try and visit these industrial complexes, and I see a lot of dynamism. I see a lot of capability. And I think if we are able to work it out intelligently, then in times to come, may not be immediately, it will take time. And my reckoning is that it will take something about 6 to 10 years for that kind of a complex to come up. But I think the potentiality exists. But the potentiality, unless and until we join the dots, that potentiality will not, would not become a reality. It will still remain a potential, but the potentiality definitely exists. And to that extent, we realize the importance of this particular thing, and in Southern Command we are seized of this issue, and we are taking a lot of proactive steps in trying to make sure that we get this kind of a military industrial complex, because without that, with two active borders, with two belligerent neighbors, China and the Pakistan, I don't think we will stand. And we are looking at not only 2 but 2.5. You said that how especially the human part, and with Pakistan we can very well understand its human capability with all kind of sleeper cells which are there all along the border and also in the hinterland. So I think that's where we are. I think, sir, what I can say very clearly is that you are trapped, sir, and you will be part of the Southern Command. We would definitely like to sort of pick certain ideas and would like to pick your brain and would like you to dwell on those distinct subjects. And to sir, to General Parthankar, sir, I would like to say that maybe that we could make some kind of a cell which is looking at this particular conflict. In any case, we are looking at it in much detail, but the lessons learned and its application in our context, in nuts and bolts, and especially once it concerns us with China. I think if we can look at it, we will give people, we will, sort of have our own distinct people who can work out the TTPs, and can we have some kind of a model? Can we have some kind of model that this is, because if we think of it right now, possibly we would be in the right time frame to unfold that kind of a model. So this is what we would be. Lastly, it remains for me to thank you, sir, from the bottom of our heart. I think it was absolutely fascinating. All of us were glued, and if it would have continued for another hour, we would have definitely, we would not mind that this thing at all. So we will have more of these interactions. Thanks a ton, sir, and may you continue to be in the armchair, sir, glued to the screen, and continue to work and look at this particular thing with even much more concentration and much more focus. Thank you very much indeed.
May I now request Professor Shah to accept the memento from the Army Commander, please.
Thank you, Professor. I think it is absolutely delightful. Absolutely. This is the mementos that we give. This is called the crux. So, crux is the southern star. It is always there. Always there. It is the navigational aid. Crux goes to you.